Some of the most beautiful music is the most simple music that I've ever heard. And I want to encourage you today with a couple of anecdotes and a couple of helpful tips, I think, to work on your own compositions that are due tonight. In fact, there's two notes, just a piece with two notes, for example, could be so expressive, right? You all know the famous Jaws theme, right? Which in the 1970s for John Williams was a piece that elicited terror, right? It was a shark attack. So every time you hear that theme, you know someone's going to get attacked. There's also a way in which you could turn that into some sort of a love theme. In fact, there's a piece by Chopin who uses the same interval, and it's very melancholy. And he's got this half-step interval the whole time. And it's painful the way he plays it, the way he writes it. So it could elicit terror, it could elicit love, it could elicit pain. But two notes can be really expressive. You can choose to write two notes that are longer. Maybe end with a shorter note. Or you could start with a shorter note and end with a longer note. Or I did it wrong, so like that. You can connect the two notes, right? They could be separated, they could be detached. All right, so in two notes, you could have an entire world of expression opened up. So for our compositions that are due tonight, you've got 8 measures, a combination of probably 10 notes, right? So I want you to be thinking about the different types of expression that you can get in an 8-bar sequence, right? So that could be from using staccato notes, or using legato, connected notes. You can have a combination of triplets, combination of 8th notes, 16th notes, pretty much anything that we've talked about in this class up to this point. So let me play for you one more piece. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about expression today and how we can use that to elicit emotion. And I'm going to try to change it up a little bit and see if I can change the emotional feel. So here's the first piece. stop there. What kind of emotions did you feel while I was playing that? What kind of emotions did that piece elicit? Yeah.
Hopefulness.
Hopefulness. Okay, good. Describe that a little bit more.
It's like I don't know, it kind of felt like a very slight crescendo and like velocity where it's like you're kind of being uplifted a little bit.
Cool. Okay,
Maybe
so
you're, like not the happiest, but it's like you're kind of like, cheer up, like as it kind of progresses.
Yeah.
I felt that.
cool. So you're inspired and you're kind of hopeful, like something big is about to happen, right?
Right.
Yeah, good. What else? What other emotions? Yeah.
It kind of felt like I was watching like a trailer of like a kid growing up. Like it felt like
Oh, interesting.
the
Okay.
youth, they're like screwed, you know?
Yeah, almost nostalgic, like you're thinking of a simpler time or going back to your childhood. Yeah, that's a really good emotion. What else? What other emotions did we feel from that? It's interesting how everyone could feel something different or describe it slightly differently, even though we had the same experience, right? We all were listening to the same piece. So let me play it again. Let me see if I can do the exact same thing and play it a little differently and see if I could change the emotions a little bit. Let's see. Anybody notice a difference? Yeah.
I felt that it kind of felt like something was coming to an end, or like something was closing, like a period of time or something like that. Like maybe not a good one, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like a sad ending.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, I saw behind you some head nods. So some others agreed with you that was the emotion. Who felt that? Who felt kind of like a closing or a sadness to that? Yeah, right? So what was the difference then between the first performance and the second performance? I played the exact same notes. So what was the difference between the first and the second one? Yeah, go ahead.
The second one was a lot slower.
Yeah.
And it was held on a lot longer.
Yeah, so it was a lot slower. What's the word for that when we change from fast to slow? Yeah.
Or changing tempo.
Changing tempo, exactly. So tempo is going to be one of the biggest keys in choosing our emotional context. And in fact, for thousands of years in classical music, we've been fighting with this. Some scholars say that you can't change the emotion, that music is completely objective, and others say that it's completely subjective, that based on a certain amount of attributes, you can manipulate emotions. And one of the things we noticed is when we had a faster tempo, it felt a little bit more uplifting, right? It felt hopeful. And the exact same piece of music played slower felt completely different. It felt sad. Felt like something was ending. Almost like your high school graduation, where you've been with your same friends for 4 years, and you know that you're all going to go off into different areas and experience different things, and you're not going to see each other at lunch every day, right? So there's like a different kind of sadness, or like something's coming to an end. So interesting, very, very, very perceptive of you all to notice that. And this is actually going to be our discussion for today, this tempo, figuring out the different tempos that we can use in our music to change the different feeling. Now, as we did this experiment to figure this out, I want to posit that tempo is extremely important in music. In fact, it's one of the most important things we have as composers. If you just throw it away and just put a generic tempo you're kind of missing out on probably 80% of the piece. Now, the software we use, Noteflight, automatically starts at 120. I talked about this a little bit in other lectures, but it's something that, I'm not mad at 120. There's nothing wrong with 120. But it's just kind of a default tempo. And what I want you all to think about as composers, as musicians, I want you to think about how the tempo that you choose is going to affect the piece that you write. So first it starts from this emotional place. I want you to say, okay, what kind of emotions do I want to conjure up? And it can be just from introspection, or from taking a long walk, thinking I want to convey a certain emotion. And then you can, from there, decide, okay, I need a faster tempo, or I need a slower tempo. Now, most tempos are going to fall between the range. You can't answer this. But most tempos are going to fall between the range. She's my other class, and I already did this, so she knows the answer. But they fall between the range of 80 and 120 or 140, really. This is kind of how psychologists say we feel most comfortable listening to pieces between quarter note equals 80 BPM or 140. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're most comfortable as humans between 80 and 140? Yeah.
Isn't that the range of like heartbeats per minute as well?
Yeah, exactly. It's the general range of our heartbeat, right? Of course, in a resting state, we could be a little slower. And if we're running really fast, we could be a little bit higher. But generally, the human heartbeat is going to be between 180 and 140. So these are the tempos that make us feel the most comfortable. If we go below this, if we go to a tempo that is, let's say, at like 40 beats per minute. It tends to feel too slow, and it gets rather boring, right? If you can potentially listen to it, depending on a context that works, like a really sad scene in a movie, right, where maybe someone just died, or something bad is about to happen and you're trying to build up tension. But generally speaking, in most music, 40 just feels a little bit too slow. And in the same way, something like 240 or even 300 feels so fast to us that we actually subdivide the tempo. So if we have something around 240 that we're listening to, actually we tend to hear it more at 120. We tend to slow it down in our heads. I'll play something really fast for you to show. Now, if I asked you to write down all of those notes, you'd be completely lost, right? Maybe you'd get the first couple, right? But there's no way that we could comprehend all of that just happened because it's too fast. So we tend to hear it in larger chunks and group them a little bit differently. So when you're writing your own compositions that are due tonight, I really want you to think about choosing a tempo that's in this range between 80 and 140. Now, historically in classical music, we had most of our music was discovered in Italy. So we still use Italian words even now. It's kind of a tradition that we've just held on to. So one of the things that we want to look at are some of the Italian words for tempos. Now, one of the slowest tempos that we have that we can use is called largo. Largo is going to be anywhere from about 40 beats per minute to around 50. These are averages, right? In science, anytime you have a zero after a number, it's an approximation, right? The fewer zeros you have, the more precise it is. So if it's like 42.5, it's a pretty precise number. 40 is kind of an approximation, right? So it could be 39 or 41, or 51 could still count, as largo. But that's pretty much the slowest tempo that we have. Anything slower than that is really hard to count. And just like I was saying for 240, how we tend to subdivide, anything slower, we actually tend to multiply. So if you've got something at like 20, we'll actually try to feel it at like 80 or something that's a multiplication of that so we can actually feel the pulse. Now the next one above largo is going to be lento. Another L word here. And that's about, anywhere from 40 to 60. So again, these overlap. You could theoretically say that And so if you hear a piece that's at 45, you could say it's either largo or lento, right? So there's some overlapping. The next one is adagio. Now adagio is about 51 to 60. So generally speaking, it's still a pretty slow tempo. So on the exam coming up on Friday and any quizzes that we might do in the future, I'm not going to be so precise to where you have to be able to split hairs between like 50 and 51, but you will want to know these terms. I'm actually just looking for the eraser. Does anyone know if it's the eraser? I'm kind of blind up here. Huh. Maybe someone threw it. Maybe what we'll do is use the other side. Oh, I'm going to rewrite these for you. So we have largo. Then adagio. Now, generally speaking, I would kind of group these all into one group. Call it very slow. So again, if you hear something between 40 and around 60 beats per minute, you're probably going to be safe labeling it as largo, lento, or adagio. In fact, funny story, Beethoven was one of the very first composers who actually used a metronome. Before the classical period, Beethoven was a classical composer. Before the classical period in the Baroque, there weren't really any tempo markings. There was really just kind of one standard tempo, and the rhythms we would write, like quarter notes, if the whole piece was in quarter notes versus eighth notes, that would dictate the tempo. So if the piece was all in eighth notes, it would be at a certain tempo. If the piece was all in quarter notes or half notes, it would be at a different tempo. And then Beethoven came around in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and the metronome came on the scene. And the funny story is that actually Beethoven's metronome was said to be broken. It was one of the very first metronomes created. And so all his tempo markings, they theorize, are actually incorrect. There's some pieces that he's written, like his symphonies, that actually can't be played at that tempo. Like they're just physically impossible. And they theorize it's because his metronome was actually broken. So it was a lot slower. Like he would put like say 180, but really it was only clicking at like 60 or 65. And so everyone tried to play it at 180, and it's just impossible. But what we can do nowadays is actually on our phone we have apps that we can pull up. If you haven't downloaded one, there's one that I like to use called Frozen 8. I can't remember if it's free or not. But the nice thing about this function is there's a tap metronome function. So what you can do is if you're not sure what the tempo is, you can actually tap it, and then it'll actually tell you the exact metronome. Now, in film scoring, actually let me show you real quick. So if you tap it here, you can see whatever the tempo is of the piece. So I'm tapping at 98.
1, 2, 3,
which is going to be
4.
that speed, right? Now, in film music, we actually put very specific tempos. So for some of you that have studied film, you might see like a John Williams score, like 108.63, right? Which you might think, how in the world are they going to count out 108 beats and then .63? Generally, the reason we have the decimal points for precision is because of the cuts. So they're actually trying to line up the music with the cuts, and we use what's called a click track. So the musicians are playing with a click in their ear to give them the exact tempo. So for us, when you're not using a click track, for the most part, the numbers are pretty round, okay? So again, don't get worried about the exact nature of it, where it has to be exactly 60.25. It's just kind of a generality, okay? Now the next one, a little bit faster than that, is andante. And before the advent of the metronome, the way we figured out andante is just about walking speed. In fact, the translation is walking. So we call it like kind of how fast we would walk. So you're just kind of walking around. That's approximately an andante. So andante is typically from about 61 beats per minute to about 80. Okay? And again, you could, I'm not going to have you all stand up, but you could theoretically walk around the classroom and just kind of feel the andante by walking around. Moderato, I would say, is about in the middle. So kind of right in the middle of our comfortable tempo. We've got 81 to 90 BPM. That's moderato. That's kind of in the middle. That's going to be similar to mezzo forte with dynamic. It's just right in the middle, kind of separates the two extremes. And then going faster, we've got 3 more that I want you to learn. I want you to learn allegro, vivace, and presto. Now, allegro is pretty fast. I would say a lot of pieces fall within this range. I don't have a statistic, but I'd say maybe a good 25 to 40% of music is going to fall within allegro. So this is actually a pretty common tempo from 105 to 132. Now, above this, it starts to get pretty fast. Remember, on the other side of the board, I was talking about psychology of our heartbeat. Above 140, we don't see too many pieces. Unless it's some sort of a frantic thing, like someone's running away from a murder in a horror film, or there's a concerto and it's this big show-off piece. And the composer's like, I'm going to write the hardest thing I can think of. So we're going to be, playing 16 notes at 180. You're just all, around your violin or your piano. You're just kind of going up and down to show off. That's where we get these 2 tempos. So vivace means really fast or really quick. It's basically anything faster than 132. I'd say maybe 132 to around 165, 168. And then, of course, let's say 168 just for the sake of it. And then presto is pretty much anything faster than 168. So that's just pretty much, as fast as you can play, right? Now, typically speaking, when we do this, these are all the quarter note pulses. So when we listen to music in a second, I'm going to have us try to find the pulses, which is somewhat subjective. I'll give it to you right off the bat. It's one of the hardest things to do is actually find where the pulse is. Because if this is the pulse, some of us could feel the pulse twice as fast, right? Some of us could feel it 4 times as fast, and some of us could feel it twice as slow. So it's really hard. So I always get questions of how do you find the actual pulse, right? Now, in order to find a pulse, sometimes what we do is obviously think about, it should be between 80 and 140, so if it's lying at like 500, that's probably not the pulse. If you're snapping like this, that's probably not the quarter note pulse, right? The other thing to think about is the grouping. So if you hear a pattern, like we were talking about meter last class, and we looked at 4/4, we looked at 3/4. If you can hear a grouping of 4 beats, like ooh-ra-da, 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 then sometimes that grouping will help you determine what the quarter note pulse is. Okay? Any questions about this, though, before I move on? I don't want to go too fast and move us along. Go ahead and spend some time, though, getting familiar with these terms. It's going to show up in a few different places, and I want to play a few pieces for us to kind of get some experience with that. So let me put this down here. Now I'm going to cheat and use a metronome so I know exactly the tempo that I'm using, just for fun. But let's see if we can figure it out. Okay. Let's take a guess at what tempo, approximately, that would be. So one of the 3 slower ones, one of the 3 quicker ones, or one of the 2 in the middle. What do you think? Yeah. Pretty close. It's pretty close to Andante. Yeah, that's pretty good. So that was technically 55. So it could be, it's right below Andante. I would probably put it at an adagio. But the other thing to think about, too, is the pulse. So, right, if we feel the pulse, this was the pulse, right? Does anybody hear the meter or the pattern that I was playing in? What was the meter? Yeah, in the back there.
Was it 3/4?
It was in 3/4, right? So you hear a low quarter note here, and then 2 higher notes. And then the pattern changed every 3 beats, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. chords now. All right, but so that's a 3/4 pattern. So good. Let's try a couple other ones. Let me see where I could get a good tempo here. This is a good one. So before we guess the tempo, let's see if we can find the pulse. So let me play it again, and what I want you to do is either snap or tap your foot or clap and see if you can find the pulse with me, okay? Let's try it again. Here we go. And for those of you over there, don't look at my metronome. Okay, so a lot of us are here. Who feels the pulse is being slower, like here? Anybody? One person?
I felt it
Both ways? Yeah. Can we feel it slower? That's kind of too slow, right? That doesn't feel right. So it's probably either this one or this one, right? Now, most of us picked the first way, which was this way. So someone from that group, what did you hear that told you that that was the pulse and not something slower or something faster? Yeah.
Kind of like the first beat felt more, I don't know, like I guess stronger. Like it felt like the pulse, and then everything after was like a you know.
Yeah. So I think the key word there is stronger. So there was kind of an accent on the first pulse, right, to kind of define where the pulse is, right? There's a kind of a stronger hit, right? So how many, or who caught this? How many notes were in the pulse? In other words, if we just zoom in, like we were looking at the first day of class, to those beatbox notations, how many notes were actually in one pulse? I'll play it again. Anybody catch it?
Is it 3?
Close. That's a good guess. That's a good guess. So if we did 3, the pulse would be, right? So it's 6. Yeah, exactly. So this is actually the tempo, right? So the one person who picked the slower tempo was actually correct, right? And that's how it's tricky, right? Because it could exist at 2 levels. So the process is almost like the scientific method. We want to make a hypothesis by looking at all the information, including the meter, the accents, and then we can try to figure out what the pulse was. And the biggest thing is when the pattern changes. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that pattern change tells us what the tempo is. So now that we know this is the pulse, what would we say this fits into? Which one on the board there?
Would it be a leg counter?
So Lego would be really quick. That would be the feeling it in 3, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Moderato, because it's a little faster than andante.
Yeah, so it would be about a moderato. It'd probably be it could be even a little slower. Let's see what the exact tempo would be. So I've got 54 as the exact tempo there. So it'd be somewhere around adagio. Like if you put adagio to probably andante, I'd be okay with that. So there'd be like a 30 click range that I'd be okay with. If you put allegro, I think that'd be too far away. If you put largo, that'd be okay. Lento, adagio. So pretty much anything on the bottom half here is probably okay with that. So the biggest thing is just dividing it between slow, fast, and then somewhere in the middle. So I think if you put moderato, I'd probably mark it okay. But it would have to be definitely on the slow side of moderato for that. Let's do a couple more, just for fun here. So I'll play a piece that most people probably have heard before. Who wants to be bold?
Beethoven.
Did anybody know what piece that was?
For at least.
For Elise, right, by Beethoven. Yeah. So the pulse, what was the pulse there? Anybody want to tap it out? Interesting. So we have a little dissection here. So let's take your two pulses and see. So you were going it like this, right? So what were you hearing as the pulse? Bum, 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 bum. That'd be eighth notes, right? Ba, da, 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 da. And what were you hearing as the pulse? 4 maybe? Was that what you were doing? Or were you doing 3? Bum, 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 bum. So it was like, because it could be like 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I don't even know if I could play this. It's really hard to do. But so you could divide in 3, right? You could divide in 2. You could actually feel it in 16th notes, right? So if we waited for 4, right? So ba da 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 ba ba da. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what would make it a little bit more obvious? If we decide between 2 as our pulse and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 versus. How can we decide between those two?
The slow probably feels more accurate because then you're giving a more clear accent as opposed to giving like everything an accent.
Oh, right. So the interpretation, right? Because you'd have to accent every 2 beats, right? So, right, versus the 4 would be more of a longer line, which would be, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Yeah, that's actually really good. I think even if I can extrapolate on that a little bit, listen to the left hand. So we're getting distracted by the motive, which is 2 notes, which tricks us into thinking it's a 2-note pulse, right? But think about the left hand here. See if you can hear. I'll play a little bit louder. So how many notes are in the pattern before it changes chords? All right, let me play it again. There's 6. So now we have a dissenting opinion, right? It could be either 2, it could be 4, or we could feel it in 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. Well, maybe it wouldn't work for the opening. But here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Dun, dun, dun. Now, I will say that the opening part starts on a pickup, which is the back part of a beat. It's the last part of the measure. So it doesn't start right on the downbeat. So we could feel it like this. Who decides to feel it after all of this discussion as 8th notes? Where the tempo would be like this. Who wants to say it's an 8th note pulse? Okay, no one. Wow. Okay. And who wants to say it's quarter note or 16th note? So 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Who's on 4? No one's on 4. I've scared you all. Okay. What about 6? Maybe everyone's on 6. 1, 2, 3, or excluding this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've convinced you all that 6 is the tempo. Very interesting. So someone from this group, why? Why is 6 all of a sudden the favorable tempo. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, those beginning two notes, are there 8 of them before we get to the like arpeggios?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then one. Yeah, exactly. There's 8.
And you said there's
Mhm.
a pickup,
Mm-hmm.
so I was thinking that like that pickup offsets
Mhm.
that count, like those amount of notes.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything else, all those arpeggios are in 6s, basically.
Exactly. So there's a smoke screen in the beginning, right? There's this thing that is not really helping you with the tempo, right? It's really the pattern of change that's important. All right. So we would either want to feel it in 3, which was your initial impulse, or 6. And then from there we could decide, okay, it's actually a lot slower. So that would mean that if it's a slower tempo, to have these quicker notes, they're just playing 16th notes, right? Now, if you feel that as quarter notes, this will be the pulse. If you feel them as eighth notes, this will be the pulse. Da, 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 da. If you feel it in 6, the pulse would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Now let's see if that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 falls within our 80 to 140, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's about 60. So it's pretty close. It's not within that range, but it's pretty close. If we were to do it as all these were quarter notes, we'd have 351, which falls way outside, right? So that's one, if you think like each note is a quarter note, that's one you could just throw away. Even dividing that in half, what would be half of that, like 125? That could potentially work, so the eighth note pulse. But then you have a lot of accents, which isn't the intention. So I would, because of all of this, I would agree with the majority of you now that the 6 pulse is the actual tempo. So that would put us around 60, around an adagio. Okay? So that's how we want to figure it out. When we listen to a piece, don't get distracted by the first few notes. See if you can feel the pulse over the course of 30 seconds or so, and then decide based on that. A lot of the time, the 16th notes are going to throw us off because we're going to hear quick notes and think, oh, it must be a fast tempo. It must be vivace. But then what you're saying is that these are quarter notes, which means there's only 4 per measure, which means there has to be really, really tiny measures. So generally, faster tempos, or what we think of as a faster tempo, is really just 16th notes or 8th notes. And the majority of the tempos are going to lie within the moderato to slower range. Okay? So questions about that? Now, on the quiz, and I think there's an exam coming up on Friday, we'll have some listening. So for this first one, I'd like you all to just try it without your metronome. Obviously, what you could do is listen to the tempo and then get the exact pulse and then say, okay, this falls within allegro, and then click that one. But just for fun, I'd like you to actually try it and see if you can figure it out. So listen to the clip on the exam, and then without using your smart devices, see if you can just figure out the pulse and feel it. Honestly, even if you use your metronome, it's not necessarily going to give you the right answer, right? Because we've decided even for this last Beethoven piece that we could feel the pulse as quarter notes, 8th notes, 16th notes, or these like triplets or 6 in a beat, right? So depending on how you put that into your metronome, you're going to get a completely different answer. So really, you want to feel what the overarching pulse is based on the pattern, and then try to guess a tempo based on that.